That's also what we're talking about tonight, is taking steps of faith, moving from one place to the next. And hopefully tonight as we leave, we'll feel like no matter what it is for us, it's probably not a move out of the city this week, out of your home or whatever for each of us, but there's probably somewhere in our lives that God would say, get up and get moving out of the spot that you're in. Today is a very unusual day for me, but it comes every year. September 25th is the anniversary of my father's birthday. So it's my father's birthday and my parents' anniversary. So it's usually a pretty emotional day for me. So I was sobbing in Starbucks for several hours, because I can't do it at home because I have little kids. But I think I got it all out. So I'm pretty confident that I won't be sobbing up here tonight, but who knows? And one of the things that, I'm pondering, 43 years my parents would have been married if they were still around. And just obviously all the unbelievable treasure that I got to observe growing up between two people who were so incredibly different. Muslim, Indian, doctor, a farm girl, who grew up picking cotton before and after school in Alabama, holiness, churchy, religious, Southern, all that stuff. I look at the two of them, they don't make any sense. They never made any sense to anybody. But they, I think, would love each other more now if they were here than they did last year. That's what I always observed about my parents. And I forget sometimes what a blessing it is to have been able to observe that. But also just thinking about my dad today on his birthday, it really kind of made me think of, just a few things. His age, he would have been 76 years old. Now that is crazy to think of. Some of your grandfathers are probably not that old. My dad was a little older when he started having kids. Actually, the funny thing is, he was the same age when he had my oldest sister as I was when we had Cadence. So my kids will be saying that of me at the exact same age. Wow, I can't believe my mom is 76. Isn't that crazy? But part of it was, as I was reading through Hebrews 11 this week, which is the Hall of Faith chapter, where the writer goes on and on about all these examples, all these stories of faith, Abraham kind of stood out to me. And the reason is, my dad, so he's not Abraham, was not a believer most of his life, but he reminds me of Abraham in some ways because, some of you guys, I don't know, is anybody here 25 or younger? You just put your hand up? Okay. So, I know. Liar! It's the beard. It's the beard that makes us all think maybe you're a little older. Or that you have a teenager, one of the two. So 25 years old, my father was when he came to the United States from India. So I want you to think for just a second, because sometimes we are like, oh, this is so huge. And it is. Any move is huge. But think about it for just a minute. This is not moving across the state or across the country or changing schools, where nobody knows you. This is getting up from your home country 50 years ago. Okay, so there were no vast J1 visas. There was no internet to go on at the time to find people to connect with. He did not know a soul in the entire country. When he left at 25 years old, left his language, left his culture, left everything. When a girl dumped him, the music that he listened to was not the same as anyone else in this country. They drove on the other side of the road. I mean, every difference you can think of coming into a country like this, my father experienced knowing nobody, picking up and going, and started a new life. I think English was his fourth language. Now, people learned it in India, but they didn't speak it back then the way they do now. Now it's pretty much Hindi and English are the, number 1 and 2, depending on where you go. That's not how it was. And he didn't come here and start trying to learn English pass the salt, please, like we do with our languages. He was entering a medical residency when he got here. He had just graduated from medical school in India. So he's learning all sorts of words that are hard. He still said, at the end of his life, esophagus, which I thought was awesome. He just never completely learned how to say that one the way that we would say it here. I still swear he didn't have an accent, but Eric thinks he did a little bit. So 50 years he lived in the U.S., and he still was like, I use ice cubes in my drink. I'm so Western. That was a symbol to him of, I'm American. He was an American citizen, but he fought it. He fought some of those cultural things to the end. But I think, when I think of Abraham, for some reason, it really kind of makes me think of my dad. He'd be the same age now, just about, that Abraham was when his story started, which actually makes me think of what would that be like to have an entire life and then to have to get up and move and do the same kind of thing that my dad did at 25. That's kind of crazy. So we're going to kind of dive into it. In Hebrews 11, this is the part, and this is an amazing chapter. If you need faith, you just turn to Hebrews 11, and you read through this a couple times, and you walk away thinking, wow, people have had faith through things a whole lot worse than what I'm going through. I think I can too, you know? Hebrews 11, 8 through 10 is the verses we're going to read about Abraham. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as an inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. I love that. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. So Abraham got up and moved. But it wasn't just the first thing, or that would be the end of his story. Woohoo, we learned a lesson. Abraham was faithful. He got up from where he was and he went somewhere else. What we see from Abraham's life is this constant obedience in moving. So he didn't just get up from Haran and move over to Canaan. All the way through his life, he listened to the voice of God, and when God said, move again, he moved again. And we see this happening over and over and over again. We're going to look at Genesis, where his story is. Now, he didn't always do everything right. Abraham is one of these fellas that you read and you're like, seriously? You made that choice? Are you kidding me? Like, what are you thinking? Several times the same sort of decision, which I just don't even understand, that actually exemplified how much doubt sometimes he might have had in the Lord protecting him, even putting his wife at risk because he was afraid for his own safety and things like that. But what strikes me about his story is he's very fallible. He's very much like me, and yet he ends up in this hall of faith. And the best thing that I can figure out that he did was move when God said move. That's it. So in Genesis 12, we see the start of Abraham's story. He's called Abram back in this time, but he changes his name eventually. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So this is God's promise to him. This is all the things I'm going to do if you will obey me. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife, Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At the time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. So he gets up, he moves to this place, he takes everything that's, his and his family, his herds. He was obviously a very wealthy person by the standards of the day. He is leaving everything he knows. Now remember, back in this day, there were no police officers. There were no real borders. There was no United Nations guidelines of how people treated one another. There was nothing. It was basically a tribal culture where whoever got there first got that, and whoever came last was sort of at a disadvantage. And you had no idea who anybody was unless somebody could vouch for you. This is why covenant, we make such a big deal out of covenant and how Abraham cut covenant with Melchizedek just a few chapters later, because he finally had someone to say, this guy's a good guy, you want to let him into your city, or you want to do business with him. Nowadays we Google somebody and figure out if they've, done anything bad. In that day, you didn't do that. You didn't know anything unless people could vouch for you. And Abraham picks up his life and moves to a place where he has no security at all. He still has all his stuff, but now all of his people are looking to him. Are you kidding me? We just left everything. We're following you. Where are we going? I don't know where we're going. Just God said go, and that's the direction we're headed. And then they get there, and the Canaanites are there. And it's not like an accident that's in there. It's not like he gets there, and it's wide open space, and he can do whatever he wants. There's people there. And they're not nice. It's a pretty hostile environment. You see him have these interactions. He's like, I'm just here because God told me, And there are people already in that land. They do not want him there. They don't want all his stuff and all his herds. But he gets up and he goes. And he ends up in this foreign land. So even after he moves, he ends up in a place where he's got to operate in faith pretty much every day for what God is going to bring his way and what he's supposed to do to make a living there. Now, he goes to Egypt because there's a famine in Canaan. I don't see that he inquires of God whether he should do this. I think he just thinks, All right, let's go where there's food. So he goes to Egypt. He gets himself into trouble because of some of his super poor decisions. And he goes back to Canaan after the famine is over. And then he parts ways with Lot, who is his nephew. They get to a place where their herds are too large to sustain them both, because you got to have grass, where they can eat. And there are too many animals. And so they say, hey, we should go different directions so that we have enough place for all of our things, because God was just blessing them and blessing them. So Abraham says, Lot, which way do you want to go? And he looks out over the fertile Jordan Valley, the humble servant that he is, and says, I want that. That looks nice and green. I can get what's mine. You know Lot. If you know Lot at all, this is the story of his life. And he heads off to the plains right outside of Sodom. Okay, so we come back to Lot a few chapters later. He doesn't do well, but that's where he settles. And so Abraham says, you went that way, I'll go this way. So they part ways. And when this happens, God reaffirms this promise. He goes back into the promise that he gives him. And he says, I'm going to read that part at verse 14. After Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, look as far as you can see in every direction. So here Abraham has taken the worst part, and God is still reassuring him, I'm still going to bless you in this, probably because he took the worst part. North and south, east and west, I'm giving all this land as far as you can see to you and your descendants. Now remember, Abraham didn't have any descendants. He had no children at this point. God is speaking about something that's going to happen in the future. I'm going to give it to your descendants as a permanent possession, and I will give you so many descendants that like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. He's just reiterating what he's told him before, reminding him of that promise. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I'm giving it to you. So Abram moved his camp to Hebron and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. There he had another altar built to the Lord. He moved again. This is what you see. If you go through and highlight every time Abraham got up, moved, departed, left in your Bible, you're going to see how often this dude moved around. Now, Summit County's a little like that, right? Like people always moving, but we don't have herds and like extended families of people who have come along in general. It's just us, moving around. This is a dude who's like, we're going again. God spoke to me, and everybody goes with him. And think about how much pressure that might feel to us that other people are watching and following, and what if I fail them? Abraham didn't seem to care that much about that. He trusted that if God was speaking to him and he was listening, that if he got up and moved at the right time to the right place, everything would catch up. That's what we call faith. Hebrews 11:1, how we started this whole thing. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Faith shows us reality of things that we hope for. Faith is a picture of what can be. It's not a picture of what is. It's not understanding. It's long, we operate in faith long before we're ever going to receive understanding, and sometimes we never do, right, from the things that we act on. Faith is acting on something that we haven't seen yet, but are sure is going to come to pass. It is the evidence of things we can't see. This is kind of why I started off this sermon talking about my dad. I mean, he came to Christ right before he died, so I don't know him as a Christian man, really. But even with no faith in Christ, the faith that he had to get up and move and keep moving all his life and branch out into new things and take risks is unbelievable. I mean, I think back on kind of how he taught us how to do this. All of my sisters are like this, 5 of us. We are all like, where's the next thing? Can I go overseas for that? Can I do something? I mean, we're all like that because that's how he taught us. And the great thing about having a father who teaches you, you need to go out there and try something no matter how many times you fail. You actually start to believe in yourself. Right? Now, he could have been like, oh, my little princess, my fragile, fragile little girls. Let's just keep you here and treat you like little ceramic dolls. You're porcelain, you're breakable. Instead, he was like, get out there. I have a lot more trust in you and what you can accomplish than you probably do in yourself. And oh yeah, you're going to fail a bunch. But it makes you kind of sturdy over time to be like, oops, failed. Oh well, where's the next one? You start moving more. You start dreaming more. You start stepping out more because somebody actually believes that you can do it. And that's how God is with us. He pushes us because he believes in us. He could just insulate us and keep us locked away in a nice, beautiful little safe where nothing could ever get to us. But instead he says, I believe in you. I know this. I know you feel like you're going to break in half. But if you come into me as a strong tower, you won't. You're going to be okay. And we're the ones who are so fearful. What if I fail? What if I fail? He's not afraid that we're going to fail. He knows we're going to fail. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes you just do. He's not intimidated by that. God is not insecure. You ever thought about that? He has no ability to be wavered. So we're the ones who freak out. He is not worried, and neither was Abraham. Abraham got up and moved. A lot of life happened after this. He goes into battle to save Lot. He does the blessing thing with Melchizedek. We see the first example of a covenant in Genesis 15. There's that whole plot with Sarah for him to have a kid through Hagar. He and Sarah get their names changed. Circumcision comes in as a sign of the covenant. An angel comes to remind them they're going to have a baby. All this stuff happens. And Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. 25 years go by from the time that he has given Abraham this promise to when Isaac is born. But that's a lot of life in there. You see all those things that have happened? Now, some of those things are just plodding along, feeding his herds, taking care of his family. Right? And some of it's going to battle. Now, Abraham didn't know how to go into battle any more than you or I would. You know what I'm saying? He's got herds. He's not a military captain, but his family is in trouble. His nephew, who was sort of a loser, but still he's family, right? So he goes after Lot and rescues everything that's his. Like, nobody taught him how to do that. He's never mentored in the ways of going into battle. He just did it because he needed to do it. Some days he's in battle, and other days he's just feeding his family. No matter what he was doing, he was operating in faith. You know why? Because he was being obedient. And that's what we always come back to when we look at faith. Faith is acting in obedience to whatever God tells us to do. And today it might be plod along. Tomorrow it might be try something new at your job. The next day it might be move across the world and feed orphans. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Because, out of all the things that the writer of Hebrews could have mentioned we should be valuing Abraham for, it's basically obedience. And that sounds really boring to me, Obedience sounds like dull and drab. But that's what got him into the hall of faith. Other than everything else that he did, it was that one thing. He obeyed God no matter what he asked. No matter what, because his life wasn't his. I think that's why we see him respond the way he did in Genesis 22 when God says, actually, that boy that I promised and you've been waiting a quarter of a century you waited for, and then you had it 100 years old, go sacrifice him on an altar. Because he had been hearing God and obeying his whole life. So, okay, he ups the ante a little, right? But he does it. He doesn't sacrifice him because God saves him. But, he's ready to do that because he believes there's got to be something. God knows better than I do. I'm just going to obey. Think about the faith. That's usually what we think. If we had written the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, we would have put that in, right? But the writer of Hebrews is like, you know what got him in the beginning? He moved when God said move. He got up and went. And enough times of hearing God and getting up and moving when he tells us to, we can pretty much obey him in anything. I know that sounds strange, but this is how we talk about character. Every choice is a seed, and every seed bears fruit. It can be good fruit or it can be bad fruit, but it's going to bear fruit somewhere. Every single choice. So people say, I'm not going to deal with this lust issue because, look, I'm getting married. Oh, buddy, you better deal with the lust issue because it's going to come right back up around, and it's not going to make a single bit of difference that you're married. You know what I'm saying? So right now, while you're single, start making the right choices because those are going to bear fruit somewhere, good or bad. The garden is going to be overrun with something. That's our lives. And obedience is how we handle that. And I know, again, it seems strange. Faith should be like this. But when I look at these amazing heroes, what they did was they obeyed. And it's really cool. We see this in Psalm 105. I won't read the whole thing. You should read the whole chapter. We'll just go to verse 9. This psalm is beautiful because it covers what we call salvation history, the history of salvation, just reciting things that have happened. This is the covenant he made with Abraham, talking about God, and the oath he swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree and to the people of Israel as a never-ending covenant. I will give you the land of Canaan as your special possession. He said this when they were few in number, a tiny group of strangers in Canaan. They wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. Yet he did not let anyone oppress them unless he chose to let people oppress them, which was his call. He warned kings on their behalf, do not touch my chosen people and do not hurt my prophets. And then he goes on for a little bit about some other things. He comes back around to Abraham in verse 42. For he remembered his sacred promise to his servant Abraham. So he brought his people out of Egypt with joy, his chosen ones with rejoicing, with Moses. He gave his people the lands of pagan nations, and they harvested crops that others had planted. All this happened so they would follow his decrees and obey his instructions. That's what it all comes down to. If it's flashy and battle and big, obey. If it's small and tiny, obey. You know, there are a million different ways that we are stretched here in this room. If I took each one of us individually and I said, what are the things that make you most uncomfortable that God calls you to do? There would be 1,000 different ways that come across through each of us, right? For one person, it is, you know what, I've dealt with my problems for so long on my own that to get around other people and talk about what's actually happening in my life is an act of faith, right? To other people, that's easy. Been doing that for a long time. But to get up in front of people or to give a word from the Bible would be a massive stretch. That would take a lot of faith. Easy for other people, right? To be patient and meek and gentle and a good listener for some people is an act of faith. That's usually an act of faith for me. Because there's an actual gift of grace that God gives me when I'm able to do that well. For other people, that's really easy. I don't know what it is that God would say, move. It might not even seem evident. And if you told somebody else, they might be like, for real? That's like the act of faith he's telling you to do tonight? Not my business, you know? He speaks to each of us and what we need to hear. That's the good thing about God. He loves each of his kids. You know, I just sent Christmas lists out today for my sisters, for the kids, and I don't remember. We drew names for the kids or something. I can never remember. I show up, usually having chosen something the week before. And I put crafts down for Cadence and Aspen. I said, let me specify. Okay, Aspen will like something that's got like the paints included. And, she'll have like a little birdhouse at the end or a bag that's bejeweled, or something at the end. I said, Cadence likes like toilet paper rolls and like lots of duct tape. I mean, the kid just gets an idea and he just wants to create it. So go super raw on that one. I know my kids. Even when you're talking about crafts, they're different. God is like that with us. He cares about how different we each are. And whatever he's saying to us, this is why we take so much time for reflection at the end of these things, to be able to say, what is God saying to me? Because what he said to me is probably different than the person beside me, because I am different. My life is different. My personality is different. My day is different than everybody else's in the room, right? He cares that much about us. And I just read this scripture, this quote from the Screw Tape Letters, if you've ever read this book. Has anybody here ever read this? Yes. So C.S. Lewis wrote this book that is letters between an older mentor demon to his nephew, rookie demon. And the whole time through the book is this unbelievable wisdom, unconventionally communicated, from one to the other to explain how to get us all tripped up, and what we're doing. And this is one of my favorite quotes. He says, "Do not be deceived, Wormwood." This is the older speaking to the younger, named Wormwood. "Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but still intending to do our enemy's will," of course the enemy is God, right? "looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished and asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys." You think it would be something like extraordinary that's the biggest challenge to the enemy. It's not. It's just when we have now God never forsakes us, but that doesn't mean we don't feel that way, right? God never does anything wrong, but that doesn't mean we don't feel that way, right? God never does anything with which we may disagree, and yet we disagree heartily and loudly many times, right? The point is, when all of that is happening, we can look around, we can say, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where I am. Why did I bring my whole family here? I feel forsaken, and yet I'll keep obeying. Faith. That's what faith is. Rochelle, come on up.
Hey guys, I'm going to share a story and then later book more. But I kind of want to share the story of just Peter walking on water and when they see Jesus, and then I'll explain later. So I'm reading from Matthew 14:22 to 33. It says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid.' 'Lord, if it's you,' Peter replied, 'tell me to come to you on the water.' 'Come,' he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out to his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why do you still doubt me?" And when they climbed into the boat and the wind died, then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So I really like that story. I like it just because Peter, they see Jesus and he's walking on water, and Peter is the crazy one to say, "Yes, Lord, I'll go. If it's really you, let me come to you," because he knows who God is. And he gets out of the boat and he's doing great. I mean, the most underestimated statement was he walked on water. Just really simple. Peter walked on water. But the thing that got me was, so Jesus is in front of him and he's walking towards Jesus. And the thing that surprises me is when he got out of the boat, he just walked to Jesus. And then once the wind and waves, he noticed his surroundings, he was thrown off guard. So sometimes God can be right in front of us. We can see the Lord, our Savior, and we get out of the boat, we're excited, and then things start to suck. Oh snap, I just walked on water. What am I doing? And some of those things. And it's crazy because God is "You of little faith." And you're kind of didn't he have great faith? Didn't he get out the boat? But he forgot to realize God was standing in front of him. And that is the king of the universe. He made the wind and waves, which you're afraid of. You know what I mean? This is Peter. And I wrote something 3 years ago. So this is when I was a intern. I was a guinea pig intern at Leila and Eric's. And I was really struggling because I felt like God was calling me to Colorado. And they probably didn't know, but the whole time I'm watching their lives and living beside them, and I'm holy crap. I felt really convicted because I saw them just simply living out the gospel, really is what it was. I was really convicted to how they love people around them, and I would just go to meet their friends, go to the concerts with them, but I was really getting rocked internally. I felt like it was insane. And a lot of what Leila was saying before about the hall of faith, God was speaking to me and reminding of me, why am I doing this? And I wrote this because Peter is one of those people that we look up to in the Bible. And there are so many people like that in the Bible. We're man, they're so great. They're so awesome. But we forget that they're just like us. That Peter denied Jesus 3 times right after that. You know what I mean? Abraham, had a speech impediment, and he said to God, I don't know if you want to send me, or Noah built a boat, when it made no sense to build a boat if you've never seen rain. There were so many people in the Bible that we look up to, but we forget they were just like us. And that's why in James, he has to say Elijah, a man just like us. But he was able to move God in such a powerful way because he believed. And simply, if we have faith in God, God didn't put these people in the Bible to make them great, but he to remind us that he's great. So I'm going to just share this with you, and I hope it encourages you. I watch as like a ghost a figure approaches amidst the stormy sea. I watch from the boat afraid. What is this? As the boat reels and rocks, all I could wish is that I be asleep in bed, away from here, anywhere but here. But as I peer into the dark of night, the image of someone I know appears. His voice calls out to me, and I know this voice. It's him. And although the boat rocks and the lightning and thunder surround me, his voice like a wave floods my soul with peace. And it takes all of me not to run out to him. But the ocean lies before me, and I can't swim. But if he walks on water, can't I walk too? And before I can think further, the words blurt out, Jesus, let me come to you. And to my amazement, he says, come. And it didn't occur to me at that moment that I was climbing out of the boat that 5 minutes ago I was afraid of, in fear of the storm, on the water where I believed I had seen a ghost, which has now come to be my Jesus. I cannot tell you that at that moment my mind did not operate. But as I looked at him, my heart beat faster. And I didn't think about walking on water any more than I thought about blinking. All I saw was him. But in a split second, a lightning bolt struck beside me, and thunder caught me off guard. And for that split second, the reality of what I did, walking on water, stepping out of a boat, came upon me like a wave. And no sooner did I realize my surroundings, did fear set in. And I was thinking, Jesus, Jesus, where is Jesus? And it happened so fast. I went from walking to Jesus to walking on water. Now, which is easier? All I can say is that once I stopped walking to Jesus and started walking on water, I started to sink. Oh no, what did I do? What was I thinking? I cried out, Lord, save me. And just like that, his hand reached out to mine, and his eyes set what his words would soon follow. Oh, Peter, why did you doubt me? I had thought I had known of faith, but it wasn't until he said, "Oh, you of little faith," did I realize what little faith I had in him. Sure, I walked out of a boat, but I lacked the faith to believe who was in front of me. The Savior of the world stood before me. That day, I learned more than just how to walk on water, but I had a realization of who my God was, majestic, holy, and powerful, yet wrapped in a fleshly appearance that begged no attention or acclamation. As we walked back to the boat, I couldn't help but think what that meant. God and I walked on water. I sank, but he saved. So what is there to be afraid of? In the boat, we worshiped him, for truly he is the Son of God. Now, I can only wish I could tell you that I never failed in faith after that. But as much as it pains me to say, I would soon again learn a lesson in faith. That same God who I walked on water with, I would abandon in the Garden of Gethsemane. Then at the sound of the rooster crowing, I would deny him 3 times. But please listen closely. Faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what your eyes don't see. But if you saw me, you would not be certain of what would become of me. I am Peter, once called Simon, the rock on whom Christ has built his church, and the gates of hell have not prevailed against it, and neither shall they. For with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. I am Peter, the one who walked on water and sank, the one who deserted the one he loved, the one who denied Christ 3 times. For when I am weak, he is strong. I am a disciple just like you. And if he could take a liar and a denier, imagine what he can do with you. So I must ask you this, the same word that still rings in my head from that stormy night. O ye of little faith, do you still doubt me? And I just want to ask Keaton to come up and play. So I kind of want to just let you guys know, like, in this time of reflection, just think about if there anything in your life that's holding you back, that you're afraid of, that, like, Lord, I failed you 1,000,000 times. Like, why should you use me? I would just listen to what the words God has to say to you.
I'm going to just read the last chunk of verses from that chapter, Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11:32 through 40. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets, which is just a sampling, right? By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death. Now, these are the great stories right here, okay? These are the ones where the miracles happened. And because of belief in a powerful God, he came through and he did something unbelievable. Shutting the mouths of lions and receiving people back from the dead. That sounds like where I would like my faith to be. But then he goes on for another paragraph. And he says, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. These are the people who didn't get the jail cells broken open. You know what I'm saying? Like Peter did. These were the ones who God did not come do a miracle for, like John the Baptist, who was beheaded unjustly, right? Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. Can you imagine what they must have looked like, these people? They probably didn't look like they were too good for the world. They looked like they weren't good enough for the world. These were the ones who were the martyrs and the ones who've suffered all throughout history. But this is what he says, he or she says in verse 39. All these people, all of them, earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us so that they would not reach perfection without us. They had not even seen the promise fulfilled, but they lived in such a way as it seemed like they could see it right in front of them. And that's what the Bible says about Jesus. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He endured suffering. He endured rejection. He endured whatever. He certainly endured the things that I have to endure in my life, right? As we are heading into this time of reflection where we're going to just take this song to listen to the Lord and ask him, what are you saying to me about me, Lord? How do I operate in faith? Not just on the grand ways, but this week, what do I do with this message? How do I obey you? How do I act in faith? How do I step out of the boat And then how do I recover after I sink? That very first time after I fail, what do I do with myself? Am I ashamed? Am I afraid to step out ever again because that same thing might happen? Or do I just get up and keep going? Lord, help us move. Help us move wherever you want us to tonight.